Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, the oil stains blending into the fabric like old memories. The garage was quiet now, save for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He glanced at the group of kids gathered around him, their faces lit with curiosity and pride as they held up the bikes they'd spent hours fixing. "You did good today," Marcus said, his voice warm but firm. "Remember, it's not just about fixing things, it's about believing you can." One of the boys, no older than 10, grinned wide enough to show a missing tooth. "I'm gonna fix my mom's bike next." "That's what I like to hear," Marcus replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Now go home before it gets too dark out there." As the kids dispersed, laughter trailing behind them, Marcus stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Across the street, vibrant murals painted by local artists brightened the otherwise worn-down buildings. Images of raised fists, blooming flowers, and faces that looked like his own. They were symbols of hope in a neighborhood weighed down by neglect. But beyond those murals lay stark reminders of inequality. Just a few blocks away, where white families lived, streets were lined with well-maintained sidewalks and lush green lawns. Here, potholes dotted the roads, and boarded-up windows told stories of struggle. It wasn't fair, but it was all Marcus had ever known. He zipped up his jacket against the chill and started walking home. The distant wail of sirens echoed through the night, a sound so common it barely registered anymore. Still, something felt off tonight, an unease he couldn't quite place. His footsteps slowed as he passed an alleyway, shadows stretching long across the pavement. Then came the red and flash of police lights in his rearview mirror. Marcus froze mid-step, his heart pounding. He hadn't done anything wrong, he knew that. But knowing didn't stop the fear from rising in his chest. Slowly he turned around, raising his hand slightly to show compliance. "Even in, officer," Marcus called out, his tone calm despite the storm brewing inside him. "Everything okay?" Officer Ryan Keller stepped out of his patrol car, his posture rigid, his hand resting casually on his holster. "What are you doing out here this late?" Keller's voice carried an edge, sharp and dismissive. "Just heading home," Marcus replied evenly. "Had some kids over at the shop learning how to fix bikes. You know, keeping them off the streets." Keller smirked, circling Marcus slowly. "Yeah, and what about you? Shouldn't you be home already?" The question hung heavy in the air, laced with accusation. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed. "I'm going there now, sir. No trouble here." But Keller wasn't satisfied. Without warning, he grabbed Marcus by the arm, twisting it behind his back. Pain shot through Marcus's shoulder as he stumbled forward, caught off guard. "What's this?" Keller barked, yanking Marcus upright again. "You got something to hide?" "No, nothing," Marcus protested, panic creeping into his voice. "I haven't done anything." But Keller wasn't listening. With brutal force, he shoved Marcus against the hood of the patrol car, handcuffs clicking shut around his wrists. Each blow landed with sickening precision. The crack of a baton against ribs, the thud of fists meeting flesh. Marcus bit back screams, tasting blood in his mouth as the world blurred around him. When it was over, Keller stood back, breathing heavily, leaving Marcus crumpled on the ground. For a moment there was only silence, broken by the distant hum of traffic and the dull ache radiating through Marcus's body. Then Keller spoke, his voice cold. "Next time maybe you'll think twice about being out so late." And just like that he was gone, leaving Marcus alone under the flickering streetlight. Word spread quickly. By morning everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. Evelyn Johnson sat at her kitchen table, staring at the cracked screen of her phone. Her son's face stared back at her, bruised and swollen, in a photo someone had posted online. She clenched her fists, tears blurring her vision. "This has gone on long enough," she muttered to herself, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound echoing in the small room. Grabbing her coat, she headed out the door. At the community center, whispers filled the air as people gathered. Some were angry, others scared, but all shared a sense of helplessness. Evelyn pushed through the crowd, her presence commanding attention. "We can't let this stand," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Marcus didn't deserve this. None of us do. But we have power when we stand together." A young journalist named Lila Carter sat quietly in the corner, notebook in hand. She had come to town chasing a story, but now she found herself drawn into something much bigger. As Evelyn spoke, Lila scribbled furiously, determined to uncover the truth behind Officer Keller's actions and the system that allowed them to happen. Outside, the first signs of protest began to form. Signs were hastily made, slogans shouted into the night. For Marcus, lying in a hospital bed with bandages wrapped tightly around his torso, the sounds of resistance brought both comfort and guilt. Comfort because he wasn't alone. Guilt because he wondered if speaking out would only make things worse. His mother visited later that evening, sitting beside him and holding his hand. "You're stronger than you think, Marcus," she said softly. "Our ancestors faced worse and kept fighting. Don't let fear take that away from you." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, but he nodded. Maybe she was right. Maybe this pain could become something more, a spark to ignite change. Marcus woke up to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of machines. His body ached, every movement sending sharp jabs of pain through his ribs. The room was dimly lit, but he could make out Evelyn sitting beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though she tried to mask her worry with a small smile. "Hey," Marcus croaked, his voice hoarse. "What? What happened?" Evelyn leaned forward, brushing his hair back gently. "You're safe now, baby. That's all that matters." But it didn't feel like safety. It felt like betrayal. Like the world had turned its back on him again. He remembered flashes, the flashing lights, the cold metal of the patrol car hood, the weight of Keller's fists. Anger bubbled inside him, hot and bitter. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus whispered, more to himself than to Evelyn. "Why does this keep happening?" Evelyn sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of decades of similar questions. "Because they think they can get away with it, but we won't let them this time." By morning, the story was everywhere. Videos of the beating circulated online, accompanied by hashtags demanding justice for Marcus. Comments poured in from across the country, some supportive, others dismissive or cruel. One post caught Lila's attention, a thread where locals shared stories of their own run-ins with Officer Keller. She clicked through each account, her stomach sinking as patterns emerged. "This isn't an isolated incident," Lila muttered to herself, jotting notes furiously. "It's systemic." Meanwhile, Evelyn worked tirelessly to organize protests. She called community leaders, drafted flyers, and rallied neighbors who'd grown weary of silence. When she spoke at a planning meeting, her voice carried both grief and resolve. "We've been quiet for too long," Evelyn said, standing tall despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "If we don't stand up now, when will we? For Marcus, for our children, for everyone who's ever felt powerless." Her words ignited something in the crowd, a spark of unity that spread quickly. Plans solidified, chants were chosen, and signs were painted. Yet even as momentum built outside, doubt crept into Marcus's mind. Late one night, Evelyn found him staring blankly at the wall, his expression hollow. She sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You look lost," she said softly. "I am," Marcus admitted, his voice trembling. "What if I speak out and nothing changes? What if things get worse?" Evelyn nodded, understanding his fear. "I know it's scary. But think about your grandparents, my parents. They fought so hard just to live without fear. You have a chance to honor their struggle, to make sure your kids grow up in a better world." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus closed his eyes, picturing his ancestors' faces. Their strength, their sacrifices. Slowly he nodded. "I'll try," he said quietly. "For them." The next day, local officials held a press conference, attempting to downplay the incident. Their tone was dismissive, almost bored, as they labeled it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, shouting until their voices went hoarse. Peaceful demonstrations turned chaotic when counter-protesters arrived, hurling insults and threats. Tear gas filled the air, forcing families to flee with children in tow. Inside the police station, Officer Keller sat slumped in his chair, scrolling through news articles about the growing outrage. Each headline gnawed at him, but he clung to familiar justifications. He should have complied faster, Keller muttered to himself. These people always caused trouble, yet unease prickled at the edges of his thoughts. Deep down he knew the truth. He'd acted out of prejudice, not protocol. And now, thanks to Lila's relentless digging, evidence of past misconduct surfaced, painting a damning picture of his career. Lila published her exposé late one evening, the article dropping like a bombshell. Headlines screamed about Keller's history of brutality, forcing authorities to reopen Marcus's case. Public pressure mounted, turning the tide slightly in favor of accountability. At home, Marcus received anonymous threats, graffiti sprayed on his garage door, menacing voicemails left in the dead of night. Fear settled over his household like a suffocating blanket. But instead of retreating, Marcus stepped forward, addressing a rally packed with supporters. "I'm scared," he began, his voice raw but steady. "Scared of what might happen if I keep speaking out, but I'm more scared of staying silent, because silence lets injustice win." The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting his name. His speech went viral, sparking conversations nationwide about racism and policing. People shared their own stories, amplifying the message until it became impossible to ignore. Still, the cost of courage weighed heavily on Marcus and his family. They installed new locks, avoided walking alone at night, and flinched at every unfamiliar sound. Yet amid the fear there was also pride, a quiet determination to persevere no matter the odds. As Marcus tucked his son into bed one night, the boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, are you brave?" he asked. Marcus smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "I'm trying to be." And for now that was enough. Marcus sat in the small, sterile waiting room outside the courtroom, his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled piece of paper with notes for his testimony. He could hear the murmur of voices from inside, the shuffle of feet, the occasional cough. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. "You ready?" Evelyn asked softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was steady, grounding him, even as her own eyes betrayed the weight of what this moment meant. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they don't believe me? What if I mess this up?" Evelyn leaned closer, her tone firm but gentle. "You're not doing this alone, baby. You've got all of us behind you. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask." The doors opened, and a bailiff called his name. Marcus stood, taking a deep breath. As he stepped into the courtroom, the air felt heavy, charged with tension. Supporters filled one side of the room, friends, neighbors, activists clutching signs that read, "Justice for Marcus." On the other side sat Keller's supporters, their faces hard and unyielding. Every eye followed him as he walked to the witness stand. The judge's gavel echoed sharply, calling the room to order. Marcus swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the wooden railing in front of him. The prosecutor began by asking him to recount the events of that night. At first his voice wavered, each word feeling like it scraped against raw nerves. "It was late," Marcus started, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. "I was walking home after mentoring some kids at the shop. Then I saw the lights." He paused, closing his eyes briefly as memories flooded back. "Officer Keller pulled me over. I didn't understand why. He never gave me a reason. All I did was comply, but his voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. "He threw me against the car, hit me, over and over, for no reason." The silence in the room was deafening. Some people shifted uncomfortably, others nodded knowingly. Marcus forced himself to continue, describing every bruise, every broken moment of trust. By the time he finished, his knuckles were white from gripping the railing too tightly. When Keller took the stand, his demeanor was calm, almost smug. "It's simple," he said, leaning forward slightly. "The suspect resisted arrest. I followed protocol. That's all there is to it." His words hung in the air, hollow and rehearsed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Lila rose from her seat, holding up her phone. She approached the judge cautiously, explaining that she had video footage taken by a bystander the night of the incident. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "this footage contradicts Officer Keller's account." The video played on a projector screen, grainy but undeniable. It showed Marcus standing still, hands raised, as Keller lunged at him without provocation. Murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom, growing louder until the judge banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Evelyn couldn't stay seated any longer. She stood slowly, her presence commanding attention. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking but resolute. "I need to say something." The judge hesitated before nodding. Evelyn turned to face the packed room, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. "I've lived long enough to see how justice works. Or doesn't. For people who look like my son. I've buried friends, lost jobs, been told to know my place. But we're done staying quiet. My son deserves better. This community deserves better." Her words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through the crowd. Even skeptics seemed moved, their expressions softening. As Evelyn returned to her seat, Marcus felt something shift within him. Fear still lingered, but it no longer consumed him. He realized that strength wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about enduring it, using it to push forward. He glanced at Evelyn, who gave him a small, proud smile. Public opinion began to turn. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, capturing the palpable change in the room's energy. People whispered among themselves, questioning Keller's version of events. Though the outcome remained uncertain, Marcus knew this was a turning point. A crack in the wall of systemic indifference. When the hearing adjourned, Marcus stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight. A group of supporters surrounded him, offering hugs and words of encouragement. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. "We're not done yet," Lila said, joining him. "But today matters." Marcus nodded, looking out at the faces of those who had stood by him. They weren't just fighting for him. They were fighting for everyone who'd ever been silenced, and for now that was enough. The news broke early one morning. Officer Keller had been suspended pending further investigation. It wasn't the full accountability many had hoped for, but it was something, a crack in the wall of systemic indifference. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the headline on his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through comments online. Some celebrated the suspension as a victory, others called it insufficient, demanding more. "It's not enough," Evelyn said softly from across the table, her voice tinged with both frustration and relief. "But it's a start." Marcus nodded, exhaling deeply. "I guess this is what progress feels like. Messy, incomplete." Evelyn reached over, covering his hand with hers. "Don't lose sight of what matters. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everyone who comes after you." Her words lingered in the air, planting a seed of purpose within him. Over the next few weeks, Marcus channeled his pain into action. He organized workshops at the community center, teaching people how to recognize systemic racism and advocate for change. Each session began with the same question: why are we here? The answers varied, but they all pointed to a shared desire for justice. "We're here because silence kills," Marcus told a group of teenagers during one workshop. "We're here because we deserve better, not just for ourselves, but for our kids, our neighbors, everyone." One boy raised his hand hesitantly. "What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" Marcus smiled gently. "You will. We all do. But staying quiet doesn't help anyone. Speak anyway, learn anyway. That's how we grow." Meanwhile, Evelyn found herself reflecting on everything that had led them here. Sitting alone on her porch one evening, she watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Her mind wandered back to marches she'd attended decades ago, protests where she'd held signs alongside friends who never lived to see this moment. "Change takes time," she murmured to herself, shaking her head. "But damn if it doesn't take too much of it." When Marcus joined her later, she shared her thoughts. "You're doing good work, baby. Keep going. For every step forward, there'll be 2 steps back sometimes, but don't let that stop you." Her words bolstered him, reminding him why he couldn't give up. Together they attended a vigil held in honor of those who'd suffered similar injustices. Candles flickered in the night as people stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces illuminated by soft light. Someone sang a hymn, their voice trembling but strong. Others joined in, creating a chorus of unity that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "This is what hope looks like," Evelyn whispered beside him. "Not perfect, but real." As days turned into weeks, small acts of solidarity began to ripple through the community. Local businesses displayed signs reading Black Lives Matter in their windows. A coffee shop hosted a fundraiser for social justice organizations, donating proceeds from every latte sold. Even skeptics started questioning their biases, attending town halls and listening sessions to better understand the issues. One evening, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a national conference. At first he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to step onto such a large stage. But Evelyn encouraged him, reminding him of the importance of sharing his story. "You've got a voice, Marcus," she said firmly. "Use it." Traveling across the country, Marcus spoke at rallies and conferences. His words resonate with audiences hungry for hope. After one particularly exhausting event, he collapsed onto a hotel bed, scrolling through messages from supporters online. One stood out. "Thank you for showing us that ordinary people can make extraordinary changes." He smiled faintly, exhaustion giving way to gratitude. Despite the long hours and constant pressure, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every speech, every conversation, it mattered. Back home, murals in the neighborhood told stories of resilience and hope. Vibrant colors covered once dreary walls, depicting scenes of unity and strength. Children played freely beneath them, laughter echoing through the streets. Watching them one afternoon, Marcus imagined a future where fear no longer dictated their lives. A new mural caught his eye. One featuring his face alongside others who had fought for justice. Beneath it, bold letters spelled out, "Ordinary people, extraordinary courage." Tears welled in his eyes as he traced the painted outlines with his gaze. Finally, standing before a crowd of young activists, Marcus delivered his closing thoughts. "Justice may be slow," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swelling inside him. "But its echoes last forever. Don't wait for someone else to fix things. Be the change you want to see. Even the smallest actions create ripples that reach farther than you'll ever know." As the crowd erupted in applause, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for now hope burned brightly, a beacon guiding them toward a better tomorrow.